Winter settles heavily over Western Europe in December 1944. Snow presses down on roads, fields, and forests, reshaping the battlefield into something slow and uncertain. Visibility narrows. Movement becomes deliberate. Sound carries strangely through frozen air. For Allied command, the season is expected to bring consolidation, not crisis. The German army is believed to be spent pushed back across France, short on fuel, short on men, and forced into defense. At the center of Allied operations in the West, Omar Bradley oversees a front that stretches wide and thin. His responsibility is vast, his authority clear. He commands armies spread across difficult terrain, linked by supply lines that strain under weather and distance. The strategy has been steady pressure across a broad front, denying the enemy space to regroup while avoiding reckless concentration. It is a method built on balance and control. The Ardennes sector occupies a quiet place in that design. Dense forests, narrow roads, and poor weather make it unsuitable for large-scale operations, at least in Allied assumptions. American divisions rotate through the area to recover. New units gain experience there. The sector becomes a place of relative calm, watched but not feared. Information arrives that challenges this calm, but not decisively. Reports of German movement filter into intelligence channels, uneven and incomplete. Some suggest increased activity east of the Ardennes. Others point to rail congestion and night movement. None provide a clear picture. The enemy's capacity for a major offensive is doubted, not dismissed outright, but weighed against months of retreat and loss. Bradley studies these reports with caution. He has learned to distrust extremes, both optimism and alarm. Intelligence is rarely complete. Patterns matter more than fragments. He waits for confirmation before reshaping the front. In the meantime, forces remain committed elsewhere, pushing eastward, maintaining pressure. The weather complicates everything. Snowstorms disrupt reconnaissance. Low clouds ground aircraft. What cannot be seen cannot be measured, and what cannot be measured becomes a matter of judgment. Bradley relies on experience, on the structure of command, and on the belief that even if the enemy strikes, it will be limited in scope. Before dawn on December 16th, that belief is tested. Artillery fire erupts along a wide stretch of the Ardennes front. The bombardment is sudden and heavy, cutting through the cold stillness. American positions are hit without warning. Communications fail almost immediately in some sectors. Units wake in confusion, unsure of the scale or direction of the attack. German infantry advances behind barrage, using fog, snow, and terrain to conceal movement. Armor follows where roads allow. The assault is not precise everywhere, but is aggressive and coordinated enough to break the quiet that has defined the sector. Forward units report contact, then silence, then reports of breakthroughs. At Bradley's headquarters, the first hours bring more questions than answers. Messages arrive fragmented. Some units report holding. Others report being bypassed. Maps are updated cautiously, markers shifting in ways that do not yet suggest a single direction. The size of the attack is unclear. It could be a spoiling action. It could be something more. Bradley resists immediate reaction. He orders verification. He requests additional reconnaissance. He asks commanders to clarify positions and intentions. Acting too quickly without understanding risks creating weaknesses elsewhere. Yet delay carries its own danger. As the morning progresses, the pattern sharpens. German forces are not pulling back after initial contact. They are pushing west. Multiple divisions are engaged. Roads thought secure are contested. The Ardennes is no longer quiet. Bradley absorbs the implications. This is not a local counterattack. It is an offensive aimed at rupture. He understands the logic behind it even as it unfolds. A concentrated blow through a weakly held sector, driven toward the Meuse, could split Allied forces and force a political and military reckoning. He issues orders to hold critical ground where possible and to slow the advance where holding is impossible. He does not promise immediate relief. He does not minimize the situation. His language is precise, controlled, leaving little room for misinterpretation. Throughout the day, the picture worsens. Weather continues to ground Allied air power, removing a decisive advantage. Roads clog with retreating units, refugees, and damage vehicles. Some formations lose cohesion under pressure. Others fight isolated, buying time without knowing who benefits from it. Bradley faces the weight of command in its most direct form. Every decision redistributes risk. Reinforcing one sector weakens another. Committing reserves now may leave nothing later. Waiting may allow the enemy to gain ground that cannot be recovered easily. As night approaches, the Ardennes front bends under pressure. The extent of the German thrust becomes undeniable. What had seemed improbable is now undeniable fact. The greatest Allied crisis in the West begins to take shape, and it rests squarely on Bradley's judgment to contain it before containment becomes collapse. Night offers no pause. Snow continues to fall, filling tracks and covering evidence of movement. Darkness amplifies uncertainty. Units that withdrew during daylight struggle to re-establish contact. Radios fail. Wire lines lie cut beneath shell craters and fallen trees. In many sectors, commanders operate with only a partial understanding of what lies ahead or behind them. Bradley's headquarters becomes a place of constant adjustment. Reports arrive out of sequence, some already outdated by the time they are read. He resists the urge to impose order prematurely. Instead, he focuses on identifying what must not be lost. Road junctions, river approaches, command cohesion. These become priorities as the front loses its shape. By early December 17th, the scope of the German effort is clearer. The offensive is broad and deliberate. Armored units push through gaps created by surprise and terrain. Infantry follows, sealing off resistance rather than eliminating it. American units find themselves isolated, surrounded without warning. Some hold. Others break contact and fall back in disorder. Bradley recognizes the danger of fragmentation. A shattered front invites panic. Panic spreads faster than armor. He sends clear directives down the chain of command, emphasizing delay and denial rather than counterattack. Time must be bought, even at the cost of ground. The objective is no longer to maintain alignment, but to prevent collapse. Weather remains decisive. Allied aircraft sit idle on frozen runways, their absence felt immediately. Without air reconnaissance, enemy movement is inferred rather than seen. Without air interdiction, German columns move more freely than they have in months. Bradley understands that the weather, not the enemy alone, has reshaped the battlefield. Pressure builds from subordinate commanders requesting reinforcements. Some request permission to withdraw. Others request authority to counterattack. Bradley weighs each request against a larger picture, which remains incomplete. He authorizes withdrawals where positions cannot be held without destruction. He denies counterattacks that would consume strength without decisive effect. The German advance accelerates in places. Fuel shortages slow some units, but captured supplies extend their reach. Villages change hands multiple times. Roads intended for rest and resupply become avenues of retreat. The enemy's direction remains consistent, westward toward the Meuse. Bradley turns increasingly to his reserves. He evaluates what can be moved without unraveling other sectors of front. Northern forces are engaged. British units face their own constraints. The South becomes the only viable source of relief, but committing it too early risks creating another vulnerability. Communication with higher command intensifies. Bradley reports the situation without embellishment. He outlines the risks and the measures taken. He avoids framing the crisis as beyond control, but he does not disguise its seriousness. The balance he seeks is not rhetorical. It is operational. As December 17th turns into the 18th, the bulge in the Allied line grows. The term does not yet exist, but the shape is unmistakable. German forces continue to push into the gap, extending their supply lines even as they deepen their penetration. Bradley sees the opportunity hidden within the danger. The farther the enemy advances, the more exposed its flanks become. Holding those flanks becomes imperative. Bradley orders units to anchor themselves on key terrain, to resist not for victory but for delay. Each hour gain limits the enemy's options. Each bridge denied complicates their plan. The cost is heavy. Casualties mount. Units lose cohesion under sustained pressure. Commanders make decisions with lives rather than lines on a map. Bradley remains aware that every order carries human consequence, even when issued in the abstract language of movement and position. By the end of December 18th, the crisis has fully matured. The German offensive has not stalled. It has not yet achieved its strategic aim, but it continues to threaten it. Bradley understands that the coming days will decide whether the front can be stabilized or whether the enemy will force a reckoning beyond the battlefield. He faces a narrowing window. Reserves must move. Decisions cannot wait for perfect clarity. The burden of command tightens, and with it the knowledge that containment, if it is to succeed at all, must succeed soon. December 19th opens with no sign of relief. The German advance continues to press outward, its shape now unmistakable. What began as a breakthrough has become a salient that distorts every Allied plan in the West. Roads meant to support eastward movement now carry traffic in the opposite direction. Supply routes tangle as priorities shift under pressure. Bradley convenes senior commanders to impose coherence on a situation that resists it. The meeting is brief and functional. There is no debate over whether a crisis exists. The question is how to absorb it without surrendering the initiative entirely. Bradley frames the problem in terms of space and time. Ground can be traded. Time cannot. He decides to accept the bulge rather than crush it immediately. Containment becomes the objective. By holding the shoulders of the penetration, the enemy's advance can be limited and eventually reversed. The decision is not dramatic, but it is decisive. It rejects panic and embraces calculation under uncertainty. This approach demands discipline from units under direct attack. Some commanders want permission to strike back immediately. Others fear encirclement and request withdrawal. Bradley issues guidance that is consistent across the front. Hold critical terrain, delay when necessary, and avoid actions that consume strength without altering the broader situation. The turning point does not arrive as a single order, but as a shift in coordination. Bradley identifies the need for a strong counterweight to the south. Forces there have not yet been fully engaged by the enemy. They represent mobility and mass that can alter the geometry of the battle if applied correctly. He reaches south. The conversation with 3rd Army Command is direct and unambiguous. The situation in the Ardennes requires immediate action. A northward pivot is necessary to strike the enemy's flank and relieve pressure at the center. There is no margin for delay measured in weeks. Days will decide the outcome. The response is immediate. Plans are already forming. Units are identified that can be redirected. Movement tables are adjusted. The scale of the maneuver is immense, involving entire corps changing direction in winter conditions. Bradley understands the risk. A poorly executed turn could expose the southern front and compound the crisis. He weighs that risk against the alternative. Doing nothing guarantees the enemy more time. Time favors the attacker only until resistance hardens. Bradley chooses action with control rather than inaction with caution. As orders flow, the burden on Bradley intensifies. He must coordinate movement without micromanaging it. He must trust subordinate commanders to execute under conditions he cannot fully see. His role becomes one of alignment rather than direction, ensuring that disparate actions serve a common purpose. Meanwhile, the enemy presses on. Bastogne emerges as a focal point, its road network drawing attention from both sides. American units there dig in under increasing pressure. German forces attempt to isolate the town, recognizing its operational value. The situation sharpens into a test of endurance. Bradley resists narrowing his focus entirely on Bastogne. He acknowledges its importance but refuses to let it dictate every decision. Relief will come, but not at the cost of unraveling the containment strategy. He maintains pressure along the shoulders of the bulge, limiting the enemy's freedom to maneuver. Weather begins to show signs of change. Breaks in cloud hint at the return of Allied air power. Bradley monitors forecasts closely. Air superiority, once restored, will alter the balance rapidly. Until then, ground forces must hold. The German advance slows, not uniformly, but perceptibly. Supply difficulties emerge. Units outrun fuel. Coordination weakens as lines stretch. Bradley sees confirmation of his approach. The deeper the enemy pushes, the more fragile the thrust becomes. By the end of December 19th, the shape of the crisis shifts. It is no longer an uncontrolled rupture. It is a contained threat, dangerous but bounded. The front remains distorted, but it holds. Bradley does not claim success. He understands that containment is only the first phase. Reversal will require pressure, movement, and coordination beyond what has yet been achieved. But the moment of pure uncertainty begins to pass. The burden remains heavy, but the direction is set. Decisions made under incomplete information begin to converge toward a single aim, preventing the greatest Allied crisis of the winter from becoming an irreversible defeat. December advances toward its end with the crisis still unresolved. The German salient holds, but its momentum fades. What remains dangerous is no longer speed, but mass. Enemy units digging along the shoulders of the bulge, fighting to protect ground already taken, while preserving lines of withdrawal. The offensive has entered a phase where endurance and coordination matter more than surprise. Bradley senses a shift and adjusts accordingly. His focus moves from emergency containment to deliberate pressure. Forces along the northern and southern shoulders receive clearer objectives. The intent is not a rapid collapse of salient, but a steady contraction that denies the enemy flexibility. Every movement is weighed against supply, weather, and exhaustion. Communication improves as conditions stabilize. Contact is re-established with units that have been cut off. Command relationships settle into workable patterns. Bradley insists on clarity of purpose. Each formation must understand not only where it is moving, but why. Confusion, tolerated briefly during shock, is no longer acceptable. Air power begins to return as skies clear. Reconnaissance aircraft map enemy movements that have been hidden for days. Fighter-bombers strike exposed columns and supply routes. The effect is cumulative rather than dramatic. German units that had advanced freely now move cautiously, aware that daylight brings risk they cannot counter. Bradley integrates this advantage carefully. He avoids overconfidence. Air support enhances ground operations, but it does not replace them. He coordinates timing so that pressure builds simultaneously along multiple axes. The enemy is forced to respond everywhere with resources that are already stretched. At Bastogne, conditions change gradually. Relief efforts gain momentum as German pressure slackens. The town remains contested, but its isolation is no longer absolute. Bradley tracks the situation closely, not as a symbol, but as a practical concern. Opening roads or strengthens the entire southern shoulder. The German command struggles to adapt. Fuel shortages limit maneuver. Units hold ground they cannot exploit and cannot abandon easily. Orders emphasize resistance over movement. The salient, once an instrument of surprise, becomes a constraint. Bradley's role becomes increasingly integrative. He coordinates with neighboring commands to ensure that advances align rather than compete. The objective is convergence. Each mile gained by one formation must support the progress of another. The front tightens incrementally. Losses continue on all sides. Winter fighting remains unforgiving. Bradley does not minimize the cost. He adjusts timetables to reflect exhaustion. He approves pauses where they preserve effectiveness without surrendering initiative. His decisions reflect an understanding that pressure applied steadily outperforms force applied recklessly. As Allied units push inward, the bulge begins to narrow. Roads once used for German advance now serve as routes of withdrawal under fire. Enemy resistance stiffens in some sectors, collapses in others. The overall pattern is unmistakable. The offensive has failed to achieve its purpose. Bradley observes the change without celebration. He knows how quickly situations can reverse if discipline slips. He reinforces command cohesion, ensuring that success does not breed fragmentation. The crisis is easing, but it is not yet past. By the final days of December, the strategic balance is restored. The enemy no longer threatens a decisive rupture. The initiative, briefly lost, returned to Allied hands. What remains is the work of reduction, measured and costly, but no longer uncertain in direction. The moment of decision approaches not as a single dramatic action, but as the accumulation of choices made under pressure. Bradley's burdens shift again, from preventing collapse to ensuring that recovery does not become complacency. The crisis has tested command to its limit. The final judgment will come not in maps, but in what the front looks like when winter loosens its grip.